All right, everybody, back to a new episode of the Conveyor Podcast. Today, we've got someone who's got impact on his mind, not just the bottom line and profits. In our guest, Robert Lee from Rescuing Leftover Cuisine. Welcome, Robert. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So Robert Lee has said he's both from Stamford, Connecticut and New York City. So a little quantum there, both places. So Rescuing Leftover Cuisine is sort of the brainchild of Robert's, who he experienced, it says here, food insecurity as a child. And he started this not-for-profit in 2013. And it looks like you're in a huge amount of cities. You've expanded 9 regions. You've rescued over 20 million pounds of excess food. And you've been running this organization to the point where you left your full-time job at JP Morgan to run this not-for-profit. That's incredible.
Thank you.
So how did you get started on this business or this not-for-profit? And tell me a bit about how you had to sell the vision and who you had to bring along.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you say, business and corrected yourself to nonprofit, but honestly, a lot of, nonprofit organizations are also businesses, right? I mean, they're just like any other entity. They have business models, they have, expenses, revenue. And so, I always like to kind of start there. Maybe it's my background from working at JP Morgan, but just want to kind of throw that out there because I'm going to be talking about that as well later on. But in terms of your actual question, truly it is something that is just very personal to me. It happened, as you said, where my parents came here looking for a better life. Very typical immigrant story, but they just didn't know the language, and so they struggled. I grew up thinking that food insecurity was just a normal kind of circumstance. Watching my parents skip meals was just, a normal occurrence. And sometimes we just have a bowl of ramen and that'll be it for the whole day. And that's, something that I think I realized was not normal when I started going to school and saw other kids, throwing out bags of baby carrots and apples and doing cute things like cutting off the ends of their sandwiches because they didn't want to eat the crust and stuff like that. And so, for me, I just grew up just rescuing that food and naturally just taking it home and eating it and just, thinking that this is something that is common sense to me, right? And the value of food and how important it was something that was ingrained in me. And so, yeah, I think in terms of convincing other people kind of the importance of the work and everything, I think, it's a very kind of long journey, but essentially, growing up like that, I kind of focused on a career in finance to shorten my time in schooling and maximize the amount of dollars I could get. So, ended up going to NYU Stern, trying to, get a career in finance. And came across a club that brought leftover dining hall food to homeless shelters. It was called Two Birds, One Stone. And it really opened my eyes to the fact that food rescue is possible, that we can donate our food. I was totally bought into the belief that it was illegal and all this stuff. And so I, just got super heavily involved with that club. And after graduating, I ended up just trying to expand that concept of food rescue beyond the borders of NYU.
So how was your entrepreneurial journey in getting it up and going? So tell me a bit about how you did your early pitching, who you've had to convince and who stuck around on your team. Very interested in understanding people's paths and growth around communications.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's super interesting as well. I mean, when we thought about even creating Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, it was something that we just wanted to kind of try and see if it worked. It was the executive kind of committee members of that club to Brimstone Stone at NYU. And the three of us essentially entered into a venture competition, and we didn't even win first place. We won second place. But that came with cash that we had to spend. And we spent it incorporating and setting up a website. And then we all respectively went off to, our full-time endeavors. And so like Paulson, for example, one of the co-founders, went, and he was already working at Gridiron in a private equity shop. And I went off to work at JP Morgan, and Louisa Chen was working at a law firm. And so on weekends and nights, we would rescue food. We would, plan and figure out how we can recruit more restaurants. In terms of who we had to convince and who we had to bring on board, honestly, it felt like the whole world. At that point, we were battling the myths that, like, we would literally get told by restaurants that it was illegal. Like, they would tell us, hey, we heard this myth, or we heard this, not myth. Obviously, they don't think it's a myth, but they were like, we heard the story that like McDonald's got sued because they donated food and someone got sick, and now we can't donate food. Like, we're just not going to donate it. And so we had to like print out the actual physical copy of the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act of 1996 and like show people that there was a federal law and a state version of that same exact law that protected food donors from legal liability. And so I ended up getting like my food handler's license. I ended up just trying to convince these food donor partners that it was okay to donate their excess food. We had to convince donors, we had to convince team members, we had to convince volunteers to get involved. And so like, I felt like we had to convince everyone, but it's been remarkable. I mean, nowadays people even seem to understand the concept of food rescue as a term. And people are starting to realize how, much of a solution it could be to climate change, not just, food insecurity and stuff like that. So it definitely seems like a big kind of, change even within the last decade.
There's a number. So I'm based in Toronto, and there's been a number of companies. There's one that's called Flash Food that
they're amazing.
Yeah, which is really sort of technically enabled too. And then there are some other flash type food discount services. I even see in my neighborhood that there's bread libraries or food libraries. So there's some cafes where they've graffitied the outside of some freezer chests or pantries. Wow. And so you can actually drop off things.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And what's funny is that, speaking of communications, I've never really addressed on this podcast the notion of sectoral old wives' tales. So the one that you are talking about that I actually thought was a fact, or maybe it's a fact, it depends on which jurisdiction, what territory you're in, that I think that restaurants donating to food banks is against the food and safety laws in Toronto, maybe, or else.
Crazy.
But the fact that you said that you actually I've never checked that, so I've just heard it anecdotally from people. So yeah. I'm not quite sure. You're making me second guess. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
It's possible. I mean, we were at the point where we worked with the Harvard Food Policy Law Clinic to like look through the legal records to be like, was this ever challenged? No, never. And so it's possible that, as food rescue becomes more and more of a thing, that this becomes, something that does get hopefully up to the point of, I don't know, more nationwide attention, maybe even through a lawsuit or something. But anyways, it's interesting that Toronto has that same myth, or maybe it's not a myth, maybe it's fact.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's been the same. You said it word for word, and that's because I've worked with a food entrepreneurship accelerator before, and so I had to learn a little. And I didn't really know enough about the food space. I knew a bunch about startup accelerators. So that was one thing I got boned up on a little bit. So when you are, here's a question. So say you are not allowed to engage with a new partner, or a new partner or a new donor, ever again, and you had to, but you still were the co-founder and executive, the CEO of the organization. How would you coach the person to replace you to take on that role, to do their job? What do you explain to partners, and how would you train that person?
Yeah, I mean, I it's interesting and it's a great question, and it's something that I think about from time to time. And when I think about like just movements in history, at least in the U.S., there have been a lot of nonsensical like things that are not allowed, right? And I think like my first reaction to things not being allowed is, if it's not allowed, like, are we gonna stop doing it? Like, I feel like, there's been a lot of cases in history, like, for example, interracial marriage was illegal. Obviously a lot of things were illegal in history that I could point to, but I'm just using this as a softer example. But people still obviously got married, and there's a lot of things that I think people kind of take a stand on. And I think that food rescue has been something that people have let it slide. Even if it was illegal, let's say it was illegal, I would still be doing this work. And for people who kind of, come into this role, or, training my successor, as you mentioned, I think it's about the mindset, right? Like, it's a different battle, right? Then we're talking about changing the law. We're talking about, how did people in the past, change laws that were completely nonsensical, right? Like, let's follow their footsteps and do what they did to make the laws actually make sense, so that food rescue can be encouraged, not, in this hypothetical world, illegal. Luckily, we don't have to do that. We don't have to fight that battle. That's already, the IRS encourages food donations. Food businesses actually get enhanced tax deductions for donating their food. So the hard part, in my opinion, has been done. What we need to do is, spread the word and get people to take advantage of those enhanced tax deductions, see the actual bottom line impact. And like I mentioned before, with the business model, obviously we are a 501c3 nonprofit. And we, obviously don't do this for money, but we do charge, just like colleges charge tuition, just like museums charge admission. We charge for the services we provide. So it's a nominal fee, $20 per pickup, is where we start. And essentially it allows our food donor partners to basically reduce their food disposal costs. So if they have a smaller container and things like that, they can, make savings there. Obviously they can get the enhanced tax deduction, as I was just talking about. And it kind of has a forcing mechanism to ensure that you find the budget for it, right? You're planning for it. You're not just doing it as a charitable kind of side thing, to create, I think, lasting impact. And for long lasting habitual change, it needs to be something that you can see on your bottom line and you intentionally do.
How do you consistently work with what's sort of the makeup of your team? So we just talked about partners there. Do you call them partners, or what's a donor? Is it a donor?
We call them food donor partners.
Donor partners. Okay. And what's your team made up? Is it volunteer based, or are there employees? How does that work?
Yeah, we started off all volunteer, and I think that that's something that is still crucial to our mission. We rely on volunteers to be the solution of transporting excess food to those who need it. But it was difficult to scale based on that capacity alone, and so we do have full-time staff. We have 15 people. We're organized into basically 4 departments. And it's, as I mentioned again, it's just like any other, company, right? Like we have a partnerships team, which is basically a sales team. We have an operations team, which is, just like you would expect, making sure that we have a 99% success rate, ensuring that we're actually, providing the service. And that's another thing, another reason why we charge. It allows us to provide a professional level of service. A lot of nonprofits in the space, because it's charitable, it's an activity that, you just do when you can. The reliability is not there, which erodes trust in the system and doesn't create a habit. But anyways, we have a
That's
marketing
really big
department.
to pick up on. So your model really is based on, it's not just the fact that you're solving this initiative or you're drawing awareness to it. You actually are an infrastructure company, right? Like you want
Exactly.
to consistently deliver on literally delivering
Yeah.
food, almost like you would compete with a Uber Eats to a certain degree, or any of these other systems. So you want to have almost that level, if not even more efficient, because you aren't making nearly or at all profit off of the delivery service in the first place.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And honestly, if we would love to partner more with, platforms that can, provide that capacity, provide the technology, because clearly they're far more well resourced than we are. But yeah, no, the way you're characterizing it is spot on.
And how important is it to establish, tell me about the journey of a donor partner. So how do they, how do you pitch them? How do you build trust with them? How do you consistently deliver on them being engaged?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. In the beginning, we honestly would go door to door and we would just, pitch and try to find the right person to talk to, because in a lot of cases you just get said no to by people who don't even have the power to say yes, right? Like, cashiers or, people who just, are there to, gatekeep. And I think we realized that later on. And so now, in a lot of cases, we actually do get a lot of referrals and partners that are referring their vendors or their competitors or, that kind of thing. But we also do have, as I mentioned, a team who kind of reaches out either on LinkedIn, trying to find the right specific person. So a supply chain manager, for example, on kind of the consumer packaged goods side, or, some kind of owner or manager on different types of food businesses. But we also do, cold emails so we could, again, reach the right people. So it's like a very typical kind of, sales outreach type of, role and function. After we kind of, talk to them about the fact that we do try to make it as easy as possible for them. We plug into their systems. They tell us when to show up, and, we will take it off their hands. And essentially, we like to start off with kind of like a trial period, just to ensure that we understand kind of, how everything works, and rescue the food, and understand what type of food we're getting so that it goes to the right nonprofit recipients who can actually use the food. But after that, it just becomes kind of a more automated, weekly occurrence. And they can choose whatever time frames, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, or, whatever, combination or recurrency that they want.
How much standardization would be in being able to go and pick up from the restaurants? What I could imagine is that your service wants to almost run in the background. You want to be integrated in how the restaurant runs, but
Absolutely.
but restaurants, and I don't quite know whether mom and pop might be ideal, like very large mom and pop, or franchises possibly might be, franchises or chain restaurants might be really good ways to get lots of footprint. But anyways, I could imagine that there was a challenge where early on, where you were probably taking too much time integrating with the restaurant, because it's such a minor priority for them, and it's a nice to have. It's like literally, and I've worked in restaurants. I worked in an Italian restaurant. I saw how busy and hectic, and as much as I love restaurants, I understand that the challenge of running a restaurant is there are so many SKUs of things to keep organized, and every staff member, this is how we fold napkins, and this is where these forks go, and it's so incredibly complex to be successful. So how much standardization is there between working with a new client, and how fast do you lock in and make sure that the relationship is seamless, to not basically to not bug them while they're doing their thing?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, standardization is key, right? And I think that I always kind of compare it honestly to like cooking oil, where it used to be viewed as just trash, and now it's like a literal commodity, right? Like restaurants can sell it, and I think that food waste is going in the same direction, right? Like they see it currently as something that's just a cost of doing business. That's something that just get out of of the restaurant. And the more we can standardize it as easy as possible and make it so that 15 minutes before close, and we're just always there consistently, habitually, just like any other service that they provide or they get, they'll think of it as a us as a vendor, right? I think the level of customization does vary depending on like the business type that we're working with. So for example, cafeterias within office buildings will have a different standard operating procedure than a restaurant, right? That's on the ground level, where we don't have to go through a freight entrance and that kind of stuff, right? But within industry sectors, it's very much the same at pretty much in the majority of cases. In terms of your second question, which of course now I'm gonna forget,
just time to value for them, making sure they're
oh yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because that's also very dependent on the industry as well. I mean, we've been around now for 12 years, and in a lot of cases, restaurants actually do struggle, right? And I think especially in a city like New York City, we see it often where they try to open and they close. And so we do try to lock in very quickly, and we try to have it be an easy lift, because it sometimes, as you said, it's just not worth the time to do all this work and then have them see them close a year later, right? Like that's why our current outreach is mostly targeted, I think you were referencing this earlier, to a lot of the chains and a lot of the larger kind of restaurant groups and things like that. Most recently, we've actually been super excited about working with Citi Field, the actual stadium, last year, and starting this year in January, last quarter, we started working with Barclays Center. And so we work with Fenway Park as well in Boston. And so there's I think an exciting kind of movement there to rescue all the excess food from all of the different stadiums, right? And so there's so many different types of food businesses and different types of ways to get excess food. But the faster we can lock in and make it a habit, the easier it is for everyone.
Let's see, I got maybe one more question for you, and this will get condensed out. So I imagine that you have a large communications network. Like you have a lot, you're pretty far spread out regionally. You're saying in Boston and in New York City. So I'd say pretty, like there's literally cultural differences between these places, right? So thinking of your communications network, also thinking of how front of mind some communications needs to be with, say, the delivery team, versus being very careful with how much you bug prospects or existing customers. and just making sure you're probably doing something really high value if you want to get their attention. What systems help you communicate? How do you lead from the top around improving your communications? How do you think about that?
It's a great question, and one I think I don't really think about enough. Admittedly, I think communications are something that we think about maybe too late. And I think in a lot of cases, we're relying on cascading messaging to kind of, push the message forward. And so when we think about communications overall, of course, we use platforms like MailChimp and things like that to, automate as much as possible and, have communications with folks via email. But we realize that that's not enough. There's so many, distractions and things like that that prevent folks from getting that direct kind of message and communication from us. And so we iterate and kind of, mention the same message across the board through many different platforms, whether it be social media or even just like on our website as pop-ups and things like that. And so it's remarkable. We feel like sometimes we, send it out on every channel we have, and people still are like, I didn't know about this. How come I didn't know about this? And it's tough. I think at the same time, there's a fine line where we're like bombarding people with the same messaging, and people are like, this is too much. And so like it's tough to ensure that we can have the right level of messaging to the right people at the right time. So it is something that we think about quite a bit. But in terms of actual platforms, also we use like Twilio. We use obviously I mentioned MailChimp, which I believe now owns Twilio. But
Are you using AI, if at all?
We love ChatGPT. I think that's totally a value add. In terms of other AI tools, I think Instantly kind of falls in that category of kind of communications. But there's just so many tools, and I think it's an exciting time in general because there's so many productivity tools that seem to be additive, and it's rather than thinking about how do we increase capacity by hiring another person, in a lot of conversations is becoming how do we reuse the right tools. I think it's interesting overall.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I think that the AI conversation has changed the narrative from believing that throwing bodies at problems are the easiest answer. And it's kind of made us point the finger at ourselves around thinking we're not fully using the tools or don't have the skills or probably like most business owners having enough time to think strategically and actually pause on it. Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. I hope that you enjoyed this chat. The format.
Great,
yeah. Super conversational. Wanted to hear authentically around what you're thinking about when it comes to casting your vision, communications, leading your team. And my goal is to focus on leaders that have an impact, and nothing better than not-for-profit. I love food too, and sort of dealing with economic opportunities, and food's the bottom, like sort of the baseline of that, I think. And so really appreciate it, Robert.
No, thank you.